Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley. And with me today is my guest, Michelle Cooper. Welcome to the show, Michelle. How are you today?
I am great, Desiree. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited for our
Wonderful.
conversation.
Yes, as am I. I am thrilled to have you on the show. And I shared with you before we got started recording that I'm super interested in this topic that we're going to be discussing. And before we get into any of that, I just want to share with the listeners that Michelle is the owner and founder of Alchemy Accounting and Bookkeeping, and she's a co-founder of the Sacred Money School. And so we're going to be talking about money, the money mindset, the relationship between money and our mind, as well as some tips for women, women business owners, and even more. So let's go ahead and dive in. I always love to have my guests share their journey, what led to this path for them. And so, Michelle, if you would tell us now, how did this all come to be for you?
Yeah, I'll give you my fast track version. I spent most of my career, my working life in corporate finance. And after I had kids, that became a little bit more challenging. And I ended up leaving a role as a chief financial officer for a large corporation because of the stress and just couldn't manage it very well. And I decided, as many of us do, I'm going to create my own business. And at the time, I was probably a little bit lost and burnt out, and I wanted something fun. And a friend of mine was like, "You always have such great taste and stuff." And I decided to open up a little women's boutique in the town that I live in, which was great. It was a lot of fun. It was open for 2 years. I say it was my 2-year MBA in entrepreneurship because it was very different working in corporate or working for a large company rather than yourself. So I learned what it's like to be an entrepreneur. I learned the challenges and the struggles. I met a lot of people in that 2 years, some other local businesses. Eventually, I decided to close the business for a variety of reasons, but I sold it off and it was great. And the people I had met, the other shop owners, the other business owners, they reached out to me to say, "Hey, can you help me understand my numbers? Can you help me understand what the problem is here?" Because they knew my background. It's so funny because, I was meeting with them and doing the work. And my husband was like, "You're charging people for this, right?" And that became Alchemy Accounting and Bookkeeping. And it grew really fast. I ended up hiring people, to amazing bookkeepers, awesome CPAs, like all of the people for the business to function effectively and smoothly. Like it's 14 years old now. So I'm 14 years along. I'm like, wow, that kind of feels like it went fast. We support business owners across North America. So the key thing is that I realized that I could help people with their numbers and we could clean up finances, right? We could clean up the books. We can get things organized. I can do the analysis. I can do the projections. But I realized that people had a really crappy, and often women had a really crappy relationship with money. Then I realized that I had a really crappy relationship with money. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something to look at. At the time, I was going through a pretty big, personal growth phase, right? Like I had left this, corporate big job with a big salary. I didn't really know who I was anymore. A lot of my identity was wrapped up in that success. So you go down the rabbit hole, right? Where you start reading books and following people. And I realized there was a lot more to life and success and everything than just the dollars and cents. I realized that I was making some mistakes just in my thinking and my belief system. So over the course of several years, I did a lot of work on myself. And then I became a certified coach so that I could help my clients because I could fix things for them, but they would often fall back into bad habits because based on their belief systems. And it wasn't a permanent change. It was just like a Band-Aid. And I don't want to be somebody's Band-Aid. I wanted them to feel confident and empowered with money. Because one of the things that I realized is that I never want women to be stuck or feel trapped in a job or a relationship or a situation or a life that is anything less than phenomenal. And often they are because of their relationship with money. So I'm going to figure this shit out. Like, I'm going to figure this out. And so, yep, that's me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Michelle. And what a journey and the experiences that you had along the way. And I love how you shared about you got a crash course MBA in, launching a business, as many people do when they decide that they want to become an entrepreneur and launch a product or launch a business. It's you're not ready, but you do it anyway, and you certainly learn a lot along the way. And what great insight that you had by taking that time and really reflecting and learning and, continuing to grow and develop and figure out where things needed to shift in your own mind. And now you can pass that on to other people. And I think that's fantastic. I love it. And that's why you're here today, is to talk with us about those things, really, how we can shift our mindset around money, our beliefs around money, and make lasting changes. I love that you don't just want to be like the quick fix or the patch that just stops the bleeding, but doesn't really solve. You're not stitching up the wound, right? You're not really healing it. So let's talk then a little bit about where we can begin with this, the thought of our mind and money.
For sure. One of the things I realized is that our beliefs around money, they're based on our interactions with money, right? And that could be what we experienced in our family dynamics. It could be our own interactions with money. For example, for me, I got into a lot of debt in university, right? And then I got out of debt, and then I found myself in debt again, and then I got out of debt. And so I realized I had this kind of feast or famine cycle. And when I reflected back, I could see that, like, I came from a commercial fishing family, and that is a feast or famine cycle of money. That's what I grew up in. So I artificially created that, even though I wasn't in an industry that has a natural feast or famine cycle. So when we look at our history with money, like our personal history, we look at the things that we witnessed growing up. If parents argued about money, or there wasn't ever enough, or there was maybe a lot and it was maybe not managed properly. All of these things, they cement into our subconscious. And our subconscious just acts from fact, right? So these are just facts. This is just how it is. But that's not true. So when we understand that about ourselves, then we can decode those things, and we can also change them. We can decide something different. It can be as simple as that. And then we can create strategies to reach our goals, right? Or handle our self-sabotage, for example. Along the way of my journey, I came across Kendall Summerhawk, who is a money coach, and she created the Sacred Money Archetypes. And this to me was a game changer, right? So I love things like archetypes. I love the hero's journey kind of thing. Like, I love all that kind of stuff. And the Sacred Money Archetypes are 8 archetypes that, like, we have all 8 within us, but we have really a top 3 that really represent our relationship with money. And in each of those archetypes, there's gifts and like strengths, and there's weaknesses, and there's areas of growth, right? That can really help us expand our trajectory of wealth, amplify our money, our bank account, that kind of thing. And also handle things like, arguments with people, with loved ones, because a lot of people argue about money. But if you know yourself, you understand your archetype, and say you have a partner, like I had a husband. If I had known his archetype, it's like the love languages. If you know someone's love language, you know what to do to make them feel loved. If I had known his archetype, we could have had different conversations about money. Because in fact, we're very opposite about money. And so there's the whole belief system. And then the archetypes are like an extra layer of like how those beliefs actually translate out into our everyday life, like our practices with money, our habits with money, and really the challenges that we get into. So it really Super informative.
Yeah, I love it. And then that was one of the things that I mentioned before we began is I was so fascinated by this idea of the archetypes. And yes, thank you for sharing some of those with us. I just have to say a couple of things. One, what an interesting thing to realize about your own actions when you're thinking back on your family dynamics and seeing this feast or famine. And it just sparked for me a realization that my father was in construction, and that is very cyclical and a lot of chicken one day and feathers the next.
Right.
And super interesting point there that just lit up for me. But I want to talk a little bit more about the archetypes. So you mentioned that there's 8.
Yeah.
And so can you just share with us briefly like what those are
Yeah.
and maybe, a couple of points of each?
Totally. So romantic, which is my top one. So a romantic archetype is someone who loves the experiences of money, right? So they're not really like a things kind of person. They like the good food. They like spending money on other people. They tend to live in the now, so they can be challenged with saving for the future. The accumulator, which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum, lives in the future and doesn't like to spend money now. So is an amazing saver, but can be very controlling around money and quite restricting. They can also be quite judgy about how where to spend money or maybe other people's spending habits. There's a lot of criticism around money for accumulators. Then there's Maverick. So the Maverick is the risk taker. This is somebody who loves the high ups and downs. So Maverick's my number 2. And that's why I love the feast or famine cycle, because a Maverick actually gets an adrenaline rush of like, how far can I push it? And they love the rebuild phase, right? Like they're very energized by that. And like I said, they're the risk takers. So they have no problems taking risks, but their biggest opportunity really for a Maverick is to create stability. If they can create stability because they're a great risk taker, they can actually grow incredible amounts of wealth because they're not really afraid of taking the risk. There's the ruler, which is the empire builder. They have lots of ideas, ton of ideas, right? They will create multiple businesses and they're very successful, but they will overwork. So the thing about a ruler is that they measure their success based on money. And so even if they have success, but it would maybe say they did a launch and they wanted to make 100K and they made 80, they would be like, I wasn't successful. And it was like $80,000 was successful, but they measure their self-worth based on money and the volume of money. Oh, so the alchemist is somebody who has a love-hate relationship with money. So one minute they might love it. The next minute they're like, I wish we lived in a world where we didn't need money. They also have a lot of ideas. They're like a huge idea generator. So they're the kind of person who's, oh, I got this new business idea. And they'll go buy the domain and then they struggle to monetize their ideas because there's somewhat of a lack of confidence in like bringing the idea to fruition and in creating money from their gifts, right? There's the nurturer. So the nurturer is someone who feels like they can fix everything with people through money. So they will overgive. They have a very lack of boundaries. They don't have a problem saving, but they can use that savings to help other people and then sometimes put themselves at a disadvantage. So their really best opportunity is to create boundaries, which can feel really hard for them because then they feel like they're not helping people. They really love to help people. One of the things I would say if I'm working with clients who are nurturers is to help them understand that by creating boundaries, you're actually empowering other people. So you're not enabling them, right? There's the connector. So the connector is someone who, just like the name says, they connect well with other people. They can make a lot of money through relationship capital. Like people are instantly drawn to them, like they're magnetic or they're repelled by them. So it's really easy for people to give them money. They're also often really good salespeople. They're very confident in that area. but they really love and value that connection with people. They don't tend to overgive so much, but they can sometimes feel a little unsure or guilty in monetizing connections. So asking for a referral, that asking for business, that kind of thing. Celebrity is someone who loves the bling. So they can have a lot of money come into them. They love the flashiness, they love the designer stuff, they love all the bling, and they're usually covering up a lack of self-confidence. And often it's funny, I always say they have the champagne lifestyle on like a soda pop budget kind of thing. The reality of their situation can be very different from the outward appearance, right?
Excellent. I appreciate you going into all the detail, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. When you were discussing the different types, I, of course, began thinking about, oh yeah, that sounds so and so, or that seems so and. And I'm sure this is what happens a lot, right? We start to recognize these things in other people or ourselves, of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely recognizing some of those things that you mentioned. And it's okay. So that's interesting. Now, I've got to think about that for a minute. I love the detail that you shared with us. Thank you so much. So then let's talk maybe about some suggestions on if we begin to explore those archetypes and which one we're sort of recognizing as, number one, number two, number three for ourselves. What are some changes maybe we can begin to make depending?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a link so people can do an assessment and you can get your top three, right? Because you'll want to know that. Just listening to the description, you probably are like, ding, that's me kind of thing. But you'll want to see that ranking because sometimes you can be very close for several of them, right? You do the assessment, you can get the full description of each archetype. And then you look at it. Okay, so for example, if I look at the ruler, the biggest challenges for a ruler are not indulging in enjoying life in the moment because they keep themselves so busy, right? They're always chasing that moving target, right? Like that lack of celebration and acknowledgement of their achievements. And they do have a deep feeling of not enough money. So you can go the opposite end of those three things and go, well, what can I do? How could I be a little bit more in the moment? You don't have to make big sweeping changes because big sweeping changes aren't sustainable in the short term. So be like, how can I acknowledge and enjoy being in the moment with money, right? How can I celebrate? So celebration for a ruler is a really big deal. Like they don't celebrate. They're one of those tick the box, move on to the next goal. Well, celebration really is a key to increasing your vibration and attracting more abundance into your life, right? So we want to pause and acknowledge, we want to celebrate. And then, of course, the feeling like there's never enough, that's a limiting belief. So change that. There's always enough. There always has been enough. There always will be enough. There's always enough. And then we can take this into if we have a daily practice where there's affirmations or meditation or journaling to look at, okay, how can I step into this more fully? And how can I lean into my gifts? Like I said, with the connector, when I meet connectors and I say to them, you have a really amazing gift for connecting with people and you can use that, you can leverage that gift to make more money. And they're like, oh, sometimes they feel uncomfortable with that because they just love connecting. And so now you're adding money into the conversation. So it's just learning how to leverage that gift, what I call their superpower, and really like lean in hard on that because it's there for a reason. Like I'm a romantic. And so that's like, it's my top one. And there is a pretty big jump between my top two and my third. And so I love experiences, right? And that's what I spend my money on. But what's happened in my business, and I only realized this after the fact, is I actually really care about my client's experience. That's proved to be very beneficial in my business because we've had clients for 14 years and we put a lot of money into the client's experience. So does it mean we're the Walmart of accounting, bookkeeping? No. Absolutely not. The client's experience is really important. And so that resonates with me. And that means that my business is showing up in the world with an energy that is directly related to me. If I try to do a kind of Walmart bookkeeping and accounting firm, there would be a disconnect. It wouldn't be congruent and they wouldn't work. It's like leveraging your gifts and creating strategies for your weaknesses or your, the things that can be improved upon.
Yeah, I love it. I'll include the resource in the show notes, of course, for the listeners. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And so then I want to talk about now as a business owner, maybe what are some ways that we can work with managing our finances in a way that is sustainable. And I know, you've really got to begin by working on your mindset, your thoughts around money. And, of course, then it's going to influence your behavior with that money. So talk us through some of that. And what are some other suggestions and strategies?
Yeah. So obviously, I believe the foundation of everything is your mindset and your belief system, right? Working through that yourself, getting support on that from a coach or, reading a book, whatever it is for you. And it's not a one and done thing. This is an ongoing thing. Version of you is going to require something different, right? So getting clear on that and being willing and open, coachable to changing is really important. And then I tend to look at it a three-legged stool, right? So a lot of people will be like, okay, there's mindset. I've done the money mindset thing. I'm good. Everything should magically work and I should have a gazillion dollars in the bank, right? So that's one leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is your actual dollars and cents. So is that kind of neat and tidy? So do you have, it's like the Marie Kondo effect, right? Clean up your stuff. If you've got piles of unopened mail, are you in avoidance of stuff? Are you not looking at your money? Are you not looking at your credit card statements? Do you have unfiled taxes? Do you have a bookkeeper? Are the books up to date every single month, right? Like sometimes people will be like, I have a bookkeeper. She works on it when she has a chance. Well, no, you want somebody who's working on it every week or every month, right? Not just randomly. You would need accurate, detailed financial records to make important business decisions. So getting the right support, the qualified help, cleaning things up, right? So if you've got a business and your financial records aren't up to date, hire somebody to get them up to date so that you've got accurate financials to look at. If you haven't filed taxes, get that done, cleaned up, because energetically, it's like an open loop out there, right? It's like just hanging out there, undone. If you've got things hanging around, like I said, like unopened mail or, things, just clean it up. One really fun thing you can do, I love this. I always tell new clients to do this. Get your wallet out. Does your wallet really represent you and what you want, your relationship with money? So I did this with a client recently, and it was so funny because I said, get your wallet, show me your wallet. It was like this red leather wallet that was like all ripped and torn and like very well loved. And I was like, do you feel proud bringing that out? No, not really. I've had this wallet since grade 8. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, what's going on there? Right? Like, why aren't we willing to have something nice to hold our money? And then she opened it and there's all this stuff in there that doesn't relate to money, right? There's no cash. There was no cash in her wallet. There was like papers and receipts and notes and sticky notes and a pen and like a candy and all this stuff. Like, just clean it up. And the best advice is, you know what? Go get a new one. If you've had your wallet for a little bit, it's probably got old energy attached to it. Get rid of it. Let it go. Go find yourself a wallet that you're like, I love this thing. This is amazing. And have it nice and neat and tidy, right? That's something fun you can do because we want things to be not only physically cleaned up, neat and tidy, but also energetically. So energy is like what I see as the third leg of the stool, which is the whole energetics of the money, the old wallet, the Are you in lack? Are you walking around talking about how you can't afford anything or everything's so expensive? What's going on energetically? Look at that, right? Clean that up. And that usually relates directly to your belief system and whether you're in a fight or flight state or you're in an empowered state. But a lot of times, like a mindset person or coach will be like, do the mindset work. And they do that, but don't look at the other two areas. Energy person, energy worker will be like, clean up your energy and do Reiki and have crystals and all that stuff and not look at the dollars and cents, right? And sometimes people do two, but they don't do the third. And then it doesn't work. When you actually clean up all three parts, that's where you see a quantum shift in people. It takes work to do that, and you need support usually. So get the right help.
Oh my gosh. Fantastic advice, Michelle. Really, I love it. The point that you made about the wallet being, old and torn up and full of all these random papers. I think that there's listeners who can probably relate to that, or a wallet maybe that you are embarrassed to bring out, and that, by that description could be embarrassing. But then I think it also points to how we choose to spend our money. This is still a perfectly good wallet. Like
Right.
a mindset could be, it still works. It's good enough. But it's an interesting thought there. Is this good enough? Should you have a working wallet that's not torn up or shredded or whatever, falling apart? And so that's a really interesting point. And then how you talked about the three legs, I think is brilliant, because you're right. We often just look at one aspect of something. And if you don't look at the other part of the other two parts, really, as we're discussing, you're missing pieces. And the unfiled tax returns, not that I have any, because that would just drive me bonkers. But I can see how when you get into that, where you're just like pushing it off because you don't want to look at it, you don't want to deal with it, it's too much work, then it just becomes this thing that hangs over your head and then completely shifts your energy. I could absolutely see that.
Totally shifts your energy. It totally does. Because then you start worrying about when people call your phone, you don't know the number, or the mail that arrives from the IRS and you don't want to look at it, or, none of this stuff is difficult to do on its own, but it can feel very overwhelming for people. And so it takes small steps. And like I said, get support, right? You don't have to do this alone. You're not expected to know all these things, and understand yourself better so that you know where you're at and you know what your like habitual pattern of behavior is. So for me, I don't worry about the future. I have a very deep trust that everything is working out exactly as it should, and it will always work out. It always has. I don't know. But I had to figure out, okay, like I'm 55, I'm divorced now. I trust that everything's going to be okay in the future. But what if I could create a strategy to give me a little bit of a back plan? Right. So I had to find a strategy that worked for me, because I don't like to take away from the now of money. Like I don't really care about the future. I just know that it's going to be fine. But for me, the shift came when I reframed that for myself, in that I was providing a future for my kids. Should something happen to me, there's going to be something there for them, right? To, I don't know, take care of things, to do whatever that needs to be done, right? And so that helped me commit to creating some plans for the future, some investment, putting money into investments rather than, spending it now or whatever I felt like. And then, like you said, like the piece around the money, anywhere that we feel resistance is a really good thing to notice. So if you're like, oh yeah, this wallet is good enough, you feel resistance to change, I'm going to say you have to change it, but you want to ask, why am I resistant to this? What's going on? Well, it's, you shouldn't waste things, or I don't have enough money to buy another wallet, or, that kind of stuff doesn't matter to me. That all might be true. I don't know, but we just want to be curious and ask, okay, well, what's going on here? Why do I think that? is that actually the most abundant energy? Because the energy piece, people sometimes poo that or whatever, but it is really important. You're not going to create what I call your rich life from lack and scarcity. It's not going to happen, right? So, what is going to shift you into a more abundant energy authentically and cultivate that in yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. It's really, it sounds like reflecting on these things that you're exploring and
Yeah,
asking yourself, what does it mean to me? And maybe where did it come from? Was it something I learned from growing up from my parents? As many of us did, it's like
absolutely.
something is good enough. It's still working. Don't get rid of it. And that maybe came from your parents who had parents who were in, the depression. And
Totally.
so it's like these things get passed down and then you're carrying around this idea and it's from 2 generations ago. Yeah.
Totally. And that's really common, right? Like many of us come from immigrant parents or, people, even grandparents who were involved in our lives and they were for sure in the depression. And things were different back then. There were actually some, lack and scarcity, right? Sometimes there wasn't all the resources that we have available to us now. We don't live in the same times though, right? It's not ours to carry forward anymore. And I think one of the biggest gifts that you can give your kids and future generations is to recognize where you're carrying forward things that are no longer appropriate or valid and change that so that it's not carried forward into future generations. So that's probably one of the things I'm most grateful for is that I have been through a lot of this process and this work and continue to. And my children's relationship with money is very different than mine. And they just operate in a completely different way. And that to me is awesome because they're going to have a very different future. Right.
Yeah,
So,
that's very true. And really, this conversation can be around so much, not just the money aspect, but, you know, the way that we talk to our children, the things that we tell our children, how we behave with our children. It's, a lot of these things carry from generation to generation. And that's a whole nother conversation that I've had a podcast guest on talking about mother-daughter relationships and that kind of generational trauma. And so absolutely money is part and parcel of that as well. And helping to clean that up with yourself, making a difference in your children's lives or their future. It's, I think, a wonderful thing anytime we can do that. So you touched on in this conversation piece here about the future. And so then let's talk about as we're working on building wealth and kind of this legacy piece for our children or, maybe grandchildren, how can we navigate that in terms of beliefs and maybe steps?
well, I think at the very basis, it's being willing to have conversations about money with everybody in our family, right? There's probably a lot of your audience who grew up in households where people didn't talk about money, or when they did, it was tense at the very least, right? So I feel like I equate it to be like sex. Be willing to just talk about it, right? Like it might feel weird at first or uncomfortable or whatever, but when we understand ourselves, so you can do that by understanding your archetype and what you believe, right? When we understand ourselves, we can have different conversations. And when we understand others, for example, for me, one of my daughters is an accumulator and she's a saver. And so we just had a conversation yesterday where she was like, she's complaining that someone was making a weird noise in her car. And I was like, well, just take it in for a service because that's what I would do. She's like, oh, I don't know anything about cars. Like, take it in for a service. It's like $200. What do you like? I don't, and she's in university and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, let's just talk about that. Like, where does that come from? And she's got money in her savings. She saves like a crazy person, but it's like the controls. One of the really common beliefs that is important to dispel is that money gives you security, and it does not, because money can come and go, and it can also devalue really quickly. And so there's no security in having $1 million in the bank, like none. And we even see situations like last year where people went to take money out of the bank and it wasn't even there. So money doesn't provide security. You provide security to yourself through your connection with God, the universe, source, whatever it is for you, right? So we can look at our own thinking around security and see if is there a connection there that I think I have to have money or a certain amount of money or whatever to feel secure, because you can feel secure without anything, right? And like I said, being willing to have conversations about it, even though it might feel weird or uncomfortable, conversations that aren't tense. One of the best little prompts that I give to clients is, wouldn't it be fun if? So you can journal on that. You can meditate on that. You could just talk about it, right? Like you could talk about it with your kids. Wouldn't it be fun if, I don't know, we went to Disneyland, we bought a Louis Vuitton handbag, we went to the farmer's market. I don't know, right? It's a great conversation question. And it's a great journaling question, because wouldn't it be fun if is really light energy, not attached to anything, right? Like it's fun. Wouldn't it be fun if we did this? Now, for some people, it would be hard because they don't equate money with fun. And then you have to look at that, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Good stuff. I think that the point you made about, well, first of all, yes, money and sex are very difficult, well, can be very difficult conversations if you let it be. If you let it be, it doesn't have to be, right? It's just taking the step, and you're in a relationship with someone. You should be able to have these conversations because you're partners, right?
Yeah.
And I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. It can sometimes feel adversarial, but it doesn't have to be. And, money is probably the number one thing that couples argue about.
Absolutely.
And about how the money is being spent, really, I think is what it boils down to. And that goes back to archetypes, right? What's important with the money and how it's used. And again, having that conversation, figuring out what archetype you are, so you can really get into a good conversation about how it's important to spend money to you or not spend money. And I want to save or whatever. And then what does that all mean in the grand plan going forward?
Yeah.
Or do you have a plan?
Totally. And, one of the things that became really obvious to me in my marriage, specifically about money, is that it's the meaning that we create about ourselves and about the other person and about the relationship because of the money conversation, right? So just super quickly, I'm a romantic as my number one archetype. My husband was an accumulator. So I live in the now and I don't really care about the future. An accumulator lives in the future, doesn't care about the now. So those two things are opposite, and that's fine. But the meaning that I created from our conversations about money was that he didn't care. Like, I want to enjoy our money now. I want to go on holiday. I want to do these things. I want to have date nights. I want to enjoy it now. And he couldn't do that because being an accumulator, he was always wanting to secure our future. I created a meaning that he didn't care about me. He didn't care about the date night, the holiday, the thing. And for him, he thought I was being reckless. He created the meaning that, well, she doesn't care about our future. Maybe she thinks we're not even going to be together in the future. She's not even worried about that. She just wants to blow it all now. And so there's the actual, like, what's going on, but then there's the meaning that we create about ourselves and about the situation and the relationship and all this stuff that is so important to dissect and look at and have a conversation about. Because if we had known this about each other, we could have had a different conversation and we could have understood each other better and came up with a compromise, right? But we didn't. And so, yeah, it's one of the reasons we ended up divorced, because we just felt like we weren't compatible. We didn't have the same goals.
And what you just shared about the meaning that we are placing on whatever the action is, right?
Yeah.
That's the root of it, is whatever meaning we're assigning to it.
Yeah.
So good, Michelle. That's so good. That point that you just shared. I love it. And really, I think for the listeners, I hope you got that. And really, take that to heart and think about what meaning are you placing on something if you are not in alignment necessarily with how you and your spouse or your significant other are spending money. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned briefly about rich life. And I know you have a podcast called The Rich Life Revolution. And so I would love for you to share that with the listeners right now. Tell us about the show and, what you guys talk about on the show. Do you have guests? Is it just you? How often do you have episodes?
Yeah. So the Rich Life Revolution is a podcast I launched last year, and I do weekly episodes, and I alternate between guests and solo episodes. And really, it's for primarily women. It could be for anyone, but when I'm talking to my person, I'm considering it's a version of me. It's a woman who is come to a place in her life where she might feel like, is this it? Okay. Like it's okay, or even it's not okay. And I really don't want people to settle, right? I don't want people to think, well, this is just, what I got. This is the cards I was dealt. And so just get on with it. Because we don't live in that kind of world anymore. That might have been the experience for some of our ancestors, right? Where there was very clear roles and things and restriction, right? But in the world that we live in now, you can pretty much work from anywhere. You can travel wherever you want. You can do things. And we have this whole world is opened up to us. And we don't have to settle for something that's less than phenomenal. And so I love to share stories of people who are creating their rich life. Now, I say it's your rich life revolution because it's for a lot of people, it's revolutionary for them. It feels like they're like in a revolution of their life kind of thing. They might be making dramatic changes, right? They could be having significant shifts like a divorce or a death or a huge career change or empty nest. Your kids are all gone and you're sitting here going, who are you? I got to spend the next 20 years with you. I don't even know you now. And I don't think that we have to feel stuck or trapped. We can create whatever we want. And part of that is understanding what we do want and then what we believe is possible for ourselves, right? Like I said, I love sharing stories to inspire people and sharing and having guests on that provide real tangible nuggets, like real takeaways for people, things, action steps they can do, things they can start to incorporate into their life. There's a cool little workbook attached to the podcast that helps people work through some of their belief systems and archetypes and stuff like that. And like your richness is based on what you value, right? So for some people, that might be living off grid with a bunch of chickens and pigs and, doing their thing. For other people, it might be living the laptop lifestyle, traveling the world. I don't know. It doesn't matter, right? For some people, a rich life is their health. Richness comes in all kinds of forms. It's not about money. It's really about like that feeling of richness in your life, which kind of comes back to the romantic archetype, right? It's the experience I want people to have. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Oh gosh, that sounds amazing. And so I will for sure include the information in the show notes for the listeners to find you. I love it. It's right, speaks to my heart in inspiring and empowering people to live the life they want to live, reach the goals they want to reach, whatever the case may be. It's just about, you know, educating and having choices.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it.
Choices are so good.
Yes, for sure. Well, Michelle, we could continue to talk. I feel like there's so much more that you could share. And so your podcast, I want the listeners, of course, to go explore and listen to the topics that you discuss on the show, because I'm sure that there is so much more to this conversation that they can follow there. But I want you to share with us, as I ask all of my guests, if there's any books that you think are beneficial or have been influential for you that you'd like to share. If you do so now, I'd love it.
Yeah. So one of the best books about money is called Happy Pocket Full of Money. I don't know if you've ever read that. It really is the mindset, the energetics around money, and it helps people really understand their relationship with money. Also love anything written by Denise Duffield Thomas. She's got some great books about money and abundance, and really making things easy. Like she talks about, I think one of her books, I think she's changed the name of it, but it was something about like prosper and chill or something like that. It's like being prosperous, but not from the hustle and grind aspect, which I think, especially with some archetypes, we can get into the overworking situation, right? Those are amazing. And yeah, I just love that. Having Pocket Full of Money, to me, was a game changer for sure. So that's probably my top choice.
Awesome. I will absolutely include that information in the show notes for the listeners to find. That sounds like a excellent book, and I'm definitely going to take a look at that myself. Is there any podcasts that you enjoy listening to that you would like to share with us?
Oh, God, my favorite podcast is Mind Your Business by James Wedmore. And he has a really great combination of mindset, energetics, and just really solid, honest, like business advice. His series on leadership is phenomenal. I had all of my employees listen to it. So that's one of my favorite. Another that I binge listening to is Millionaire Girls Club. So that's with Jill Stanton. She's just super fun, really great energy, really off the cuff, and super honest and real. So those are probably my top two right now.
Love it. Great recommendations for sure. Thank you. And lastly, Michelle, if you would share with the listeners how they can find you, follow your journey and what you're teaching, that would be amazing. If you're on any of the socials, if you'd like to share with us now.
Yeah. So everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, all the things, I am at Michelle B. Cooper. So you can find me there. And if you go to michellebcooper.com, there's links to all the different places you can find me, the podcast, the different businesses that I own. And yeah, all the bits and pieces are there.
Perfect. Yeah, I will include that in the show notes as well. And again, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and sharing your knowledge with us. It has been so wonderful. And I have just gotten so many great pieces of information, and I'm going to just start exploring. And so thank you again for sharing it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's just so much fun, Josephine. I love this conversation.
Nice. We'll talk more soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.